mini story for Day of the Dead. In the mini story, I will do 3 things. I will make a statement. For example, I arrived in Guatemala. When you hear a statement, a sentence, you just say, ah, or oh. Okay? You need to say that, show that you understand this is not a question. Okay? A statement is not a question. So, when you hear a statement, say, ah. For example, I arrive in Guatemala. Ah. Okay? The second thing I will do is ask a question you know the answer to. For example, where do I arrive?
Watermelon.
I will stop. You say the answer. Okay? You must say the answer to every question. I say, I arrive in Guatemala.
I arrive in Guatemala.
Where did I arrive? You say, Guatemala.
Guatemala.
Okay, easy. And number 3, I might ask a question you don't know the answer to. If you don't know the answer, just guess. Say any answer, but you must answer every question. Use your pause button if necessary. Okay, let's begin. Okay, here we go. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st.
Ah.
Did I arrive in Guatemala?
Yes, I arrived in Guatemala.
Yes, I arrived in Guatemala. Where did I arrive?
Guatemala.
Guatemala, right? I arrived in Guatemala. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Who arrived in Guatemala
Me.
on the Day of the Dead?
Me.
Well, me, AJ, right? I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Did I arrive in Guatemala on November 3rd?
No, I arrived in Guatemala
on
November
November 3rd. I arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. What day did I arrive in Guatemala?
November 1st.
November 1st. I arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. Where did I arrive on November 1st?
Guatemala.
Well, Guatemala, right? I arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. I was curious about this holiday, so I went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Was I angry about this holiday?
No, I'm curious about this holiday.
I wasn't angry about this holiday. Was I sad about this holiday?
No, I curious
I
about
wasn't
this
sad
holiday.
about this holiday. I was curious about this holiday. Who was curious about this holiday?
Me.
Well, I was, AJ. I was curious about this holiday. What was I curious about? The holiday, right? I was curious about the holiday. Which was I curious about? Which holiday
The
was
Day
I
of
curious
the Dead.
about? The Day of the Dead. I was curious about the Day of the Dead. Was I curious about the Day of the Dead?
Yes.
Or was I curious about Christmas?
No. I was
No,
curious
I was
about
curious
this holiday.
about the Day of the Dead, of course. I was curious about the Day of the Dead. So, I went to the cemetery to see what was happening.
Oh.
Where did I go?
Cemetery.
To the cemetery. I went to the cemetery. Did I go to the cemetery or did I go to the airport?
I went to the
Yeah,
cemetery.
I went to the cemetery. Who went to the cemetery?
Me. It's me.
Well, me, right? AJ. I went to the cemetery. Where did I go? To the cemetery, right. I went to the cemetery. When did I go to
No.
the cemetery?
November 1st.
Oh, November 1st, the Day of the Dead, right? I went to the cemetery on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Why did I go to the cemetery?
Because I want
to
to
see what
what's
was
happening.
I went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Who went to the cemetery to see what was happening?
Me. It's me.
Me, AJ, went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Where was the cemetery?
Guatemala.
In Guatemala. The cemetery was in Guatemala. What is the Day of the Dead? A holiday. The Day of the Dead is a holiday. When is the Day of the Dead?
November 1st.
November 1st. The Day of the Dead was and is November 1st. Okay. So I went to the cemetery on the Day of the Dead to see what was happening. What I found was quite interesting. Was it boring? No, it wasn't boring.
It's interesting.
Was it interesting? Yes, it was interesting. The cemetery was interesting. How did I feel about the cemetery?
I felt
I
interesting.
felt it was interesting. Or I thought it was interesting. Was it boring or was it interesting?
Interesting.
It was interesting. Of course, it was interesting. What was interesting? The cemetery. The cemetery was interesting. When was the cemetery interesting?
November 1st.
It was interesting on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Okay, the atmosphere in the cemetery was like a party. Was the atmosphere
That's all about my sharing. Thank you so much for the attention.